Sound of gunshots echoed in the streets of Chicago that night before everything went quiet. A spine-chilling incident which the people of Chicago never saw coming. Was the biggest criminal in the history of America finally brought down? Was that the end to the infamous bank robber's story? A story full of shocking twists, thrilling goosebumps, and betrayals you never saw coming. The story of John Dillinger, public enemy number one. It was during the Great Depression period in America. Bank robberies, thefts, murders, crime rate was at its peak. But amidst those petty criminals, there was a name that terrorized every bank in America, the name who put the law enforcement on their toes. John Dillinger, a man who feared nobody. Robbing banks was not a need for Dillinger. It was a desire, a passion that gave him the thrill of living. The newspapers gave him the title of Robin Hood of the Depression, glorifying his crimes. It was obvious that the people hated what he did, but they couldn't resist to love the way he did it. He was the first criminal to be seen as a heroic figure. He had a very simple strategy: case the banks, map out the money, barge in with the gang, get the money, and get out as soon as possible. Now, 1933 was a time when banks had none or minimal security, so barging in was not that big of a deal, but getting out was where the trouble started. Dillinger had the code cracked. His game was to get in and get out as fast as possible, which gave the law enforcement no time to react. Before they showed up on the scene, the Dillinger gang was already planning their next heist. But things started escalating. Their next target was a bank in East Chicago. Dillinger did use guns in his robberies, but only to threaten. He was not a fan of unnecessary blood and violence. The plan was just as usual, but this time he only took 2 to 3 men with him, which wasn't following his previous patterns of taking between 4 to 6 people. He was probably trying to make it harder or more thrilling, as he would have described it. They strolled in, filled their bags, and were about to head out, but the sound of sirens wailed early this time. Things started to get ugly for Dillinger. The police were there with a do-or-die mindset, and so was Dillinger. He wouldn't have fired shots if it were normal circumstances, but now he had to protect the money that was rightfully his, according to him. Dillinger still tried to resist violence, but the police couldn't. A wild gunfight began at the bank's door. Dillinger was a bank robber and not a murderer, but he had to counter their attack. He had to get away, and during the process, Officer O'Malley was machine-gunned and killed on the scene. There is no sure proof of Dillinger being the one to pull the trigger on O'Malley, but he was the one with blood on his hands and people's eyes now. Robbing a bank was one thing, but now he was charged for shooting a cop. That was the last thing Dillinger ever wanted. He was in for a death penalty if brought to trial after the fallout. He would lose everything if captured after the incident, or that is what the people believed. John Dillinger was not an easy fish to catch. He knew the risks, and he planned things accordingly. He never stayed at a place for too long. He was always on the run, robbed a bank in one place and quickly moved to another, kept dodging the law. First Florida, then Texas, then Mexico, finally Arizona. They were everywhere. They robbed almost every place and moved somewhere else until cool down. But the chase had to stop at some point. It was when they were in Arizona. Dillinger's men were staying in a hotel, which they had to leave because it caught fire. They paid some firemen to get their bags, which were stacked with cash. This put them under the firemen's suspicion. One day, one of Dillinger's thugs was walking on the street when a fireman recognized him from the True Detective magazine. He rushed to the local police and reported the thug. This led Dillinger's men behind the bars, and Dillinger went through the same fate. He was caught off guard sleeping in a bungalow he rented. They took him to Chicago for the trial, where he was welcomed by hordes of press and an entire motorcycle-led convoy to take him back to jail. But for everyone's surprise, Dillinger had no signs of fear or sorrow on his face. All they could see was his charming smile and his cocky attitude, which can also be seen in the iconic photo in which Dillinger puts his arm on the prosecutor's shoulder and is laughing. That was his way of openly declaring that he would not stay there for very long, and he fulfilled his promise. Dillinger was put in Crown Point Prison in Indiana, which was reputed to be unbreakable, surrounded by armed cops and high security boundaries. The place was no less than hell. Apparently, Even that was not enough to stop the man from escaping. He did not use force to get out. He used his diabolical brain as his ticket to freedom. He carved a gun out of wood, fooled the guards, and stole the sheriff's car, and off he went, away from the long hands of the law with the V8 engine of that Ford. He was so impressed with the car that he wrote a signed letter to Henry Ford, thanking him for creating his escape vehicle. That was one hell of a bold move he played. He was impossible to catch for the police because the FBI couldn't budge in this matter of petty local crime, yet according to the law. But Dillinger himself opened the doors for them. A felony was committed by him. He violated a federal law by driving a stolen vehicle across the Indiana state lines in Chicago. It was an interstate theft of an automobile, and thus a violation of the Dyer Act. The director of the Bureau of Investigation, J. Edgar Hoover, already had his eyes on John Dillinger and now had all the authority to handle this case. If we put it in simple words, John Dillinger was in an unimaginably big trouble. He was not just any criminal anymore. He was marked as the public enemy #1, most wanted criminal of America, and the most famous one in the world. This incident also introduced us with a new character, Melvin Purvis. He was an uptight, unemotional, straight-to-the-business type of man. Hoover ordered Purvis to immediately drop everything and put all his force after John Dillinger. Melvin was so good with his job. It didn't take too long for him to dig out the past of Dillinger. He knew almost everything about John now, how he started, where he started, what were his initial plans, everything. John was a notorious kid from way back in time. He was into petty theft by birth, but his major first crime was when he smacked the head of a grocer and took whatever little money he had. He was arrested immediately, but for everyone's surprise, he did not try to resist or get a lawyer. The prosecutor told him that he could let him off easy if Dillinger pled guilty. It turned out to be a trap, and Dillinger was sent to the penitentiary at Pendleton, the reformatory, for a 10 to 20-year stint. All that, just for a petty grocery store theft. Dillinger made his mind. He wasn't going to let this time go wasted. By the time he got out, Dillinger was a way different man. He did not turn into a completely new leaf, but he did become a much better version of his past self. With all the knowledge and allies he gained during his time in prison, made him a force to be reckoned with. He followed with a payback by robbing a police armory of bulletproof vests and high-powered machine guns. Melvin also found out about Dillinger gang safe houses, his family farmhouse, and a few places he was a regular at. With all this unwanted fame, it was almost impossible for him to hide. But this is John Dillinger we are talking about. He wasn't going to give up that easily. With all the heat on him and his face known by almost every American citizen, there was only one place he could take shelter: St. Paul, Minnesota. The streets of St. Paul were full of corrupted cops those days. Cops who could sell themselves to petty crooks just to make a few extra bucks. You could simply buy your freedom, and not a single soul would try to bother you. It was a perfect place to wait for the cool down. John would wave at the cops, and they would lift their hats to greet him. It was like he owned the city, and they were just his guard dogs. Almost all of the cops were corrupt, but you can always find exceptions. Guess luck didn't last too long for Dillinger. He was reported by the landlady, and to her fortune, her report reached the few honest officers in the force. The FBI was at Dillinger's door, knocking intensely. Dillinger was again caught off guard, but this time he had already learned from his past mistakes. He surprised the feds by bursting out of the door and immediately throwing shots. A serious gunfight. Many got hurt. Even Dillinger got shot in his leg. But was that enough to stop him? Not yet. Dillinger made an escape. He was a free man again. The Society of Professional Magicians even gave John Dillinger his Harry Houdini Award for escaping from St. Paul. This was when he got the nickname, the Jackrabbit. Even though Dillinger was a pain in their butts, he indirectly did a lot for the FBI and J. Edgar Hoover. He gave Hoover the opportunity to pitch a national police force to catch the nation's #1 bad guy. That was the incident which made the FBI what it is today. By the middle of April, the FBI missed Dillinger like 4 to 5 times in a matter of weeks. An FBI agent once literally saw him had his suspicions, trailed him, lost him, and then believed he was just being delusional and he never actually saw him. It was when John Dillinger got too overconfident that he put his girlfriend into big-time misery. He was in Chicago to find a safe house, waiting for his underworld friend to show him around. He sent his girlfriend Billy inside a local tavern, where their contact was set to meet to check if he was there yet. It turned out to be a trap. Dillinger's friend turned out to be a backstabber, who tipped the feds about their meeting. Billy was captured on the spot. Dillinger had to make a quick escape. It might have been painful for him because, according to some sources, he was actually in love with the girl. Guess this was an end to their romance. Billy refused to rat out on Dillinger and was sent behind bars. Dillinger was on a wild spree, bank after bank, robbery after robbery. It was like he was punishing the feds to condole his pain. He was impossible to even be cited by the feds. He robbed a bank and vanished before they even got a call about it. The only way to catch him was when he was trying to lay low. One night, Melvin's phone rang. It was a tip, a genuine one as it seemed. Dillinger and his gang were hiding in the Wisconsin woods. Melvin and every available FBI man packed their bags and flew there immediately. This was a solid opportunity to put Dillinger's crimes to an end. It was during a dark night. Melvin's men arrived at Dillinger gang's hideout. They successfully maintained the element of surprise. They were set to arrest him this time and put an end to his title, Jack Rabbit. But what they did not expect was the cold weather. They were not prepared for the dark as well. Trying to keep it quiet did not work out for them for too long. Everything that could have gone wrong went wrong. The darkness was supposed to be an ally for the feds, but it backfired on them instead. Dogs started barking, men got stuck in the barbed wire, some fell into a ditch. Everything was a mess. Then suddenly 3 men came out of the cottage, got inside a car, and started to leave. It seemed like the dogs had alarmed Dillinger and he was trying to make his escape one more time. Purvis was not missing this chance. He did not go there to return empty-handed. Purvis took the risk and ordered his men to stop the car and shoot to kill whoever was inside. Purvis and his men tried to stop them with words, but unfortunately the car radio was too loud that it almost deafened the ones inside. They had no other option but shooting now. It was to their shock that the men inside were just some innocent people. This was a huge moment of shame for the feds. They were about to face a lot of setbacks due to this incident and a bad reputation in front of the public. The firing made things worse. Dillinger and his men now knew for sure that the FBI was at their door. They looked through the window and opened fire at the feds. This gave Dillinger an opening and he rushed to the forest. The FBI tried to keep up, but they could not, and Dillinger fled again. But this bust was not completely a waste. They did manage to shoot down Dillinger's one of the most important allies, Babyface Nelson, who himself was a wanted criminal. Even though it wasn't a complete failure, they had to face the consequences of killing innocent men. The FBI was shamed by newspapers all over America. Almost nobody mentioned the death of Babyface Nelson. Even the FBI lost an important agent, Carter Baum. This was devastating for Melvin Purvis. Suddenly, J. Edgar Hoover was just a joke to the media. Dillinger now had a $10,000 reward on him by the FBI, and this was really bad news for him. Melvin, with his blood-filled eyes, were now hunting for Dillinger even more seriously. Dillinger was laying low in Chicago with his new girlfriend, Polly Hamilton. They were having good times together with their caretaker, Anna Sage. Anna was basically a brothel owner in East Chicago, Indiana, but she had underworld ties going way back. She was like a nanny to all the big names in the gangster world. But there is an end to every story, and that was finally the time John Dillinger's devious life of crime came to an end. For John's bad luck, Anna was going through desperate times. She was about to be deported back to Romania by the immigration department, and Dillinger was her ticket to citizenship. They were set to go to the movies one night. This was 3 months after the Little Bohemia fiasco. John was out with Polly and Anna at the Biograph Theater, but there were some unwanted guests waiting there for him. Melvin was scouting the theater, and as soon as he spotted Dillinger, he called for backup. When the movie ended, Dillinger came out with his girlfriend. Melvin's hands were shaking with nervousness like it was his last chance to catch Dillinger. This was a perfect opportunity and Melvin took it. Dillinger was now surrounded by feds with no one else to back him up. He quickly took out his gun and rushed down the alley where he was gunned down by Melvin Purvis. Dillinger's death was ironically beside a movie theater. It was like a conclusion to the theatrical life of the man who feared nothing. Melvin later claimed that he did have respect for the man, and John Dillinger's death was not celebrated. It rather gave a sense of sadness to the weather. Everything was finally quiet for once. Dillinger was finally down,